Child abuse is defined as physical, sexual, or emotional maltreatment or neglect of a youth, and it has devastating consequences on psychological development. Unfortunately, 1 in 3 Canadians has experienced some form of maltreatment before the age of 15. And we know that child abuse is a major predictor of depression and suicide later in life. Currently, 300 million people are suffering from major depressive disorder worldwide, and every 40 seconds, somebody dies by suicide. Interestingly, those who have major depressive disorder and were abused as children actually have more severe diagnoses of major depressive disorder. They have more severe symptoms, more recurrent episodes, and are usually less responsive to treatment. But the question is why? What is happening in the brain during child abuse that causes these negative consequences later in life? Well, we don't know everything that's going on, but today I'm going to explain to you some things that we do know. My name is Claudia, and I'm a PhD student studying neuroscience at McGill, and I study depression and suicide. So the first question is, what is normal development? Well, we know that childhood and adolescence are what we call a critical period of plasticity. During this time, the brain is very susceptible to things going on in our environment. It's kind of like a piece of Play-Doh. So the connections between cells are easily changed and rearranged, kind of like a piece of Play-Doh between your fingertips. And research actually shows that child abuse occurring during this critical period can alter the way that cells communicate, specifically in areas of the brain that are involved in regulation of emotion. So that kind of makes sense, right? Something severe happening during this critical period when the brain is very susceptible changes the way that the brain develops. The next question is, why is the brain of a child more susceptible than a brain of an adult? Well, in adolescence, our critical period of plasticity starts to slow down, and the brain goes from being a soft piece of Play-Doh to a hard piece of Play-Doh that can't really be changed. And how does this happen? Well, truthfully, there's a lot of things going on, but the most important to me is the development of these beautiful things I study called perineuronal nets, seen here. So these nets are made up of sugars and proteins that come together and form a literal mesh around certain neurons in the brain. And like us, our neurons need to be protected in a safe and enriching environment to grow to their full potential. And for us, usually our parents take on this role. They protect us from what's going on in the outside world, as well as from what's going on in our own mind. For the neurons, this role is taken on by the perineuronal nets. So these nets are actually there to protect the cells that they cover from the external environment of the brain, also from the toxic products that are produced when a cell is active. And unfortunately, we know that sometimes parents take advantage of their children and they abuse them. And we think that the abuse happening during this critical period of plasticity not only alters the way that neurons communicate, but also alters the way that these nets develop. So how do we study this? Well, I'm very privileged to work with the Douglas Bell Canada Brain Bank that houses over 3,000 brains of people who died from different disorders. And specifically, I look at the brains of people who died by suicide, with or without a history of child abuse, and compare them to a third group of psychiatrically healthy controls who died from reasons other than suicide, with no history of depression. So I asked the bank for a piece of brain, and for me, that piece of brain comes from an area right above your eyes and in front of the middle of your brain, called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. But don't worry, I won't quiz you on that later. What's important is that this region is responsible for regulating our emotions. So we stain the tissue so that I can see the perineuronal nets and the neurons. And I look at them under a microscope, take pictures of them, and then we individually count every perineuronal net. And we found that there is a major increase in these perineuronal nets in depressed suicides, but specifically in depressed suicides who have a history of child abuse. So we were right. Not only is the abuse affecting the neurons, but it's also affecting these perineuronal nets that are supposed to be protective. But what does this mean? Like, how is this happening? Well, we think that during the abuse, the children are developing maladaptive behaviors and coping mechanisms. And because of this increase in perineuronal nets, we see a solidifying of these maladaptive connections. And we think that this is bringing these maladaptive behaviors through adolescence and then into adulthood. And we think that this may be an explanation as to why suicide and depression are so highly correlated with child abuse. Unfortunately, due to the nature of my research, I can't know for certain that my hypothesis is correct, because we are looking at only a snapshot of a person's life after they're passed away. But we think that we may have helped find a new target for antidepressant treatment, specifically for depression occurring after child abuse. Animal studies actually show that you can erase these perineuronal nets, and if you erase them in alive animals, you can actually erase some forms of memory, including fear memories. So my research is really important because not only can it influence public policy or help us understand what's going on in the brain of these kids that are being abused, but hopefully in 10 or 15 years, my research will have helped develop a new antidepressant treatment that can help lessen the burden of depression and suicide on the world and restore the protective nature of these beautiful things that I study called perineuronal nets. Thank you.